Inside the enormous glowing halls of the Unity Station, where species from across galaxies gathered to trade ideas, knowledge, and diplomacy, one young human named Leo stepped off the transport shuttle for the very first time, his boots tapping softly against the polished black floor as his eyes wandered in amazement at the alien architecture and colorful beings around him, his breath catching slightly at the overwhelming mixture of sounds, smells, and foreign languages that filled the air, all moving with purpose, all watching with curiosity. Leo wore his standard exploration uniform, the kind that hugged close to the body, with a small medical badge stitched to his shoulder, showing that he was a junior medic in training. Not a soldier, not a threat, and definitely not anyone important enough to draw attention, yet attention did find him in the form of tall armored security officers standing at the gate with piercing eyes and scanning equipment in their clawed hands. Among them stood Rila, a high-ranking officer of the Kraylan species, known for their rigid military discipline and complete distrust of newcomers. Her scales shimmered like metal under the light, and her eyes glowed with suspicion as she monitored the flow of visitors entering her territory. She had seen all kinds of species pass, but humans were still considered new, still unpredictable, and Leo, walking with a slight nervous stride, seemed like someone worth watching. As Leo passed through the scanner gate, a soft chime echoed. For a moment nothing happened, but then the scanner blinked red and displayed a flashing alert in the Kraylan language. Rila's eyes narrowed. Her hand reached instinctively for the sidearm on her belt, and she raised her arm, signaling the guards to halt the line. Everyone stopped movement, froze, the noise dulled, and the entire space grew tenser. Rila's voice, sharp and commanding, called out in the common interstellar tongue, ordering Leo to step aside slowly and raise his hands. Leo, confused and startled, looked around, hoping someone would explain what just happened, but all he saw were guards moving closer, people watching, and Rila advancing with cautious steps, her device in hand, eyes fixed on his lower torso. She spoke again, asking what concealed device he was carrying, what type of energy weapon he had hidden inside his body. Leo's mouth fell open, unable to process what she meant, and before he could even speak, Rila pointed at the scanner, warning that it had detected a compact energy core embedded within his lower body, a signature known to match certain high-impact explosives or prototype weapons. Leo tried to answer, but the words tumbled over each other. He stammered that he had no weapons, no devices, nothing at all. But the Kraylan guards didn't move. They only surrounded him, tightening the circle as their leader continued scanning the same area, where the strange signal appeared again and again. The diplomatic officer accompanying Leo, a stern older man named Grant, approached and attempted to calm the situation, stating that Leo was a peaceful visitor, a trainee, not a threat. But Rila refused to accept the explanation until the scan could be confirmed. She believed what she saw, and what she saw was an energy reading coming from a hidden mass in Leo's lower abdomen, something she believed could only mean sabotage, infiltration, or bioweapon tech. Panic began to rise in Leo's chest. He had no idea how to explain that what they were detecting wasn't a weapon or a device, but simply part of his natural human anatomy, something perfectly normal on Earth, yet apparently very abnormal here in front of the Kraylan species, whose physiology was completely different and who had likely never encountered such biological structure before. Yella motioned for Leo to be taken into a containment chamber for further scanning and analysis, as the crowd murmured behind them, whispering possibilities ranging from terrorism to genetic engineering, and Leo walked in silence between the guards, trying to hold himself together while his heart raced with fear and confusion, not knowing how something so ordinary could suddenly turn into something so dangerous in the eyes of an alien. And so the story began with a single scan, a single mistake, and a misunderstanding that would soon become the strangest diplomatic incident the Unity Station had ever seen. Inside the clean white walls of the containment chamber, where echoes danced off the smooth surfaces and the air carried the chill of Suspicion. Leo stood silently, his hands still raised as the Kraylan security team surrounded him with focused eyes and steady hands on their scanning tools. His thoughts raced through a storm of disbelief as he tried to understand how things had escalated so quickly, how a regular check at the arrival gate had turned into something this intense, something this strange and humiliating. Grilla entered the chamber, her posture firm and unwavering, her metallic uniform catching the cold, artificial lights. She stared directly at Leo with a sense of duty heavy in her gaze, holding her multi-spectrum scanner tightly. As she stepped forward without hesitation, she spoke in a voice that filled the entire room, stating that the energy signal detected earlier had appeared again and again. With each scan, the reading remained unchanged, pulsing faintly but consistently from one location, the exact center of Leo's lower abdomen. She explained in calm, formal words that she had dealt with many forms of stealth technology over the years, some of which involved hidden energy emitters implanted deep inside bodies disguised as organic matter to avoid detection by most standard scans. According to her training and understanding, such devices were small, deadly, and difficult to isolate. They were used by smugglers and assassins across many systems, and she believed this situation matched the signs too closely to ignore. Leo stared at her, speechless for a moment, his face reddening slightly from a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. He cleared his throat nervously and explained slowly that the source of the reading was not a weapon, not a tool, not a machine or implant, but a natural part of his body, something all human. Males had something that was not dangerous, not artificial, not at all what they assumed. Rila paused for a moment, her brow tightening and her eyes narrowing. She had studied human culture from a distance, but anatomy was never a subject. She explored in detail her species. The Kraylan reproduced by releasing spores into mineral-rich caves. They had no need for internal organs dedicated to reproduction, no limbs or extensions beyond what was required for basic function. To her, the very idea of something internal and physical being responsible for creating life seemed illogical, unnecessary, and potentially grotesque. Still holding the scanner, she slowly approached Leo again and asked him to clarify exactly what part of his body was causing the alert. Leo hesitated, unsure how to respond in a way that would be respectful without making things worse. He tried to explain in the most medical way possible that human males carried specific organs which could sometimes create heat or energy signatures, depending on movement pressure or body temperature. But Rila seemed unconvinced. To her logic, a body should not generate signals of such intensity from a single area unless it was designed to do something specific and dangerous, perhaps even detonate, perhaps charge up, perhaps send signals to other units. She leaned in closer, her scanner moving around Leo's waist, the blinking red light continuing to flash as if mocking his every attempt to explain. She stepped back and spoke into her comm device, requesting assistance from her commanding officer, who arrived moments later, tall, with heavy armor and a more serious expression. The commander reviewed the scan data, nodded, and confirmed that the energy reading was consistent with known cloak devices. He approved further investigation and instructed Rila to begin isolation tests. While a diplomatic decision could be made, Leo now found himself under more pressure than ever, surrounded by two Kraylan officers speaking in hushed tones and preparing to conduct advanced scans using deeper molecular imaging, which to him sounded painful, invasive, and entirely unnecessary. He tried again to speak, tried again to explain that no tools, no machines, no implants had ever been placed in his body, but the officers continued preparing their equipment, ignoring his growing panic. Somewhere in the main station, Leo's captain and the human representative were engaged in rapid negotiation, trying to prevent this misunderstanding from escalating further. They knew that once the Kraylan Council decided on something, it was nearly impossible to reverse. They were a people of rules and rigid logic who had little tolerance for what they saw as unpredictable behavior or threats inside the chamber. Leo could feel his heart pounding faster and faster. Not just because of fear, but also because of the intense awkwardness of trying to defend his own body against accusations that had no basis in reality. He felt like a creature placed under glass, studied and poked and misunderstood. With no voice loud enough to explain the truth, he made a final request, one that came from desperation rather than confidence. He asked if he could bring in a human doctor, someone qualified in anatomy, someone who could explain everything with accuracy, with diagrams, with proof, something that would show beyond doubt that no weapons were involved. Just biology. Rila tilted her head, considered the request, and after a long pause, she gave a single nod. The commander agreed as well, but added a warning: if the proof failed to convince them, they would proceed with removal and containment of the so-called hidden object, whether or not it caused harm. With that, Leo was left in the chamber alone, with thoughts swirling through his mind: the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of something essential being treated like a threat, the fear of losing more than his freedom because of something he never asked for, something he was born with. And outside the walls, the clock had begun to tick as the human side scrambled to deliver the one person who might save him with the truth before it was too late. The station's internal lights glowed a soft, sterile white as Leo remained confined inside the cold isolation chamber, pacing slowly across the smooth floor, his thoughts battling between fear and disbelief. He tried to stay calm, but each passing minute made it harder to believe that this entire situation had come from something so simple, so human, and yet here he was being treated like a threat, a danger, a possible enemy agent with something powerful hidden inside his body. Outside the chamber, the Kraylan officers continued discussing the readings from the scanners. They reviewed each scan carefully, comparing it with records of known energy, weapons and biological bombs used by outlaws across the galaxy. Their files were detailed and vast, but none of them included human anatomy as it truly was. Instead, the Kraylan databases only had rough outlines, basic models, and simplified diagrams, most of them outdated and incomplete. Their distrust of humans meant few of them ever bothered to learn more. Commander Threx, a towering Kraylan with a voice that echoed like thunder, entered the analysis room and observed Leo's scans closely. His eyes moved from the pulsing signal near Leo's lower abdomen to the surrounding tissue patterns, then back to the red blinking alert. Without saying much, he gave a small nod and declared that the readings confirmed the presence of a hidden energy core, likely organic in appearance, but still artificial in nature. He suggested immediate extraction for safety. Rila stood beside him, watching the scans again with growing uncertainty. Something about the readings felt strange to her. The energy was there, yes, but it was not behaving like a power source. It fluctuated with heartbeat, with temperature, with stress levels, unlike any weapon she had seen. It reacted more like a living thing, but not like technology, not like a threat. Still, her training warned her not to take risks, not to trust unknowns, not to allow assumptions to cloud judgment. Leo watched through the glass as more Kraylan technicians arrived, carrying equipment that looked sharp, heavy, and far too invasive for comfort. His heart pounded faster, his palms sweated, his voice cracked when he tried once again to speak through the intercom, requesting a delay, a conversation, a chance to be heard. He pleaded with them to wait just a little longer until the human medical specialist could arrive and clear this confusion once and for all. The Kraylan officers reluctantly agreed to hold back, but only briefly. The timer had been set by the council. They had less than an hour before Leo would be declared a biological risk and subjected to removal procedures. Regardless of his objections, the weight of that decision pressed down on everyone, especially Rila, who despite her discipline was beginning to feel unsure about the path they were walking. Meanwhile, deep in the human delegation quarters, Mira, a calm, focused xenobiologist, prepared to enter the secure zone with full access permissions. Her files packed with high-definition holographic models of the human body, including all organ systems and reproductive structure. She had studied dozens of alien lifeforms over the years, but she knew This incident would be the most difficult not because of complexity, but because of embarrassment, misunderstanding, and cultural blindness as Mira made her way through the sterile corridors escorted by 2 peace officers. She reviewed the case file, noting the strange scanner readings and the Kralin reports labeling Leo's anatomy as a hidden bioweapon. Her face remained calm, but her mind raced trying to find the best words, the clearest explanation, the most respectful tone that would not insult the Kralin pride or their security systems. Back inside the chamber, Leo sat now on the edge of the examination table, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying not to think about the cold tools lined up on the tray nearby, or the murmurs of the technicians preparing for something irreversible. He kept reminding himself that Mira was coming, that help was coming, that someone would finally speak in a way these aliens could understand, but each second felt longer than the last, each tick, louder, each breath heavier. Rila entered once more, alone this time. She looked at Leo quietly, her gaze softer than before, as if trying to understand something deeper. She asked one simple question. She asked why he seemed more afraid now than when the weapons were drawn earlier. Leo paused and gave a quiet answer. He said that back then, they thought he had a weapon. Now they thought they might remove something that was never meant to be. Rila stared at him for a long silent moment, as if those words hit somewhere she had not expected. Outside the medical wing, the clock continued to count down, and Mira stepped through the final gate, her presence now the only hope Leo had of escaping a fate born from ignorance, misunderstanding, and fear of the unknown. Inside the medical analysis wing, the atmosphere was still heavy with suspicion as Mira stepped into the sealed chamber, her eyes scanning the space, quickly assessing the tension, the looks, the silence. Her calm presence seemed to shift the energy slightly, and Leo felt the first breath of relief. Since the incident began, he stood up slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish like a dream. And he watched her closely because he knew she was the only person who could speak their truth in a way the Kralin might finally hear. Rila turned as Mira approached, her expression unreadable, her hand still holding the scan device, her eyes filled with a mix of discipline and something else, something uncertain, something no training manual had ever explained. Mira greeted her with the formal interspecies sign of respect, lowering her gaze and keeping her voice even and respectful. She explained that she had brought a full biological profile of the human male form, including internal functions and responses, based on non-invasive scanning results from Earth's highest medical authorities. Rila allowed her to continue, but she watched with suspicion. Mira moved carefully, opened her holographic case, and released a floating diagram that glowed softly in the air, spinning slowly and revealing layer by layer the full structure of the human male body, starting with bones, muscles, nerves, organs, then reaching the area that had triggered the scanner alert. Rila leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, her mind trying to match what she saw with what she believed to be true. Mira explained the details in the most neutral and professional tone possible. She described the reproductive system, the hormonal structures, the heat signatures, the natural swelling that sometimes occurred in response to stress, temperature, or even posture. And most importantly, she repeated again and again that this was not artificial, not mechanical, not explosive, not even close to being a weapon, just anatomy. The Kralin officers behind the glass observed the display as well, their expressions frozen, their arms crossed tight across their chests, trying to process the strange curves and systems that made little sense to them. And yet as Mira spoke, something began to shift. The tension in the room thinned. The hardness in Rila's eyes softened. She kept scanning the data, trying to disprove it, searching for inconsistencies, but there were none. Everything fit, every reading matched, every explanation aligned with what the scanners had shown. Leo stayed quiet, letting Mira speak, letting her do what no one else could. He watched Rila, and for the first time saw something new in her eyes. Not suspicion, not anger, but a spark of realization that maybe, just maybe, she had made a mistake, not because she was careless, but because her world had never taught her to understand something so different. Rila finally stepped back from the hologram, her tail twitching slightly, a rare sign of discomfort for her species. She looked at Mira, then at Leo, then at the scan device in her hand. Then slowly she powered it down. Her voice came softer, not as a command, but almost like a question. She asked if this natural energy could ever pose a threat in combat, and Mira smiled gently, answering that it only became a threat in matters of love or reproduction, not warfare. There was a long pause, then a strange, awkward silence before one of the technicians behind the glass let out what could only be described as a short alien chuckle, a noise that rippled into light laughter from others, and suddenly the air inside the chamber began to shift from cold suspicion to quiet amusement as the absurdity of the entire situation became clear. Rila looked at Leo again, her expression filled now with a strange mixture of embarrassment and something close to respect. She gave a small nod and extended her hand in a gesture unfamiliar to Leo, but clearly meant as a peace offering. He stepped forward, slowly accepting the gesture and replying with a light grin that maybe next time they should update their scanners to include human biology. The council was informed immediately, and the incident was officially closed, the file marked as misunderstanding caused by biological variance. No punishments, no blame. No harm done, only lessons learned and peace restored. Leo walked out of the chamber beside Mira, both of them silent for a moment, letting the strange, surreal experience settle in their minds. The fear, the confusion, the almost tragic mistake. Now just a strange memory floating behind them, but for Rila something had changed deep inside, a small crack in the wall of certainty she had built all her life, a realization that understanding another species required more than just rules and scans. It required curiosity, openness, and sometimes the willingness to admit you do not know everything. The long halls of Unity Station no longer felt cold or dangerous to Leo as he walked beside Mira through the diplomatic wing heading toward the human delegation quarters. His pace was lighter, his shoulders no longer tense, his breathing calm for the first time since he stepped off the transport shuttle. The experience had been strange, confusing, even terrifying at moments, but now with clarity restored and misunderstanding resolved, there was something deeper that remained, something that might change the way humans were seen across the stars. Spoke softly as they walked, her voice carrying calm wisdom, telling Leo that sometimes the greatest conflicts were born not from hatred, but from confusion, from the simple lack of understanding between species who had never stopped to see each other truly. And Leo nodded because he now knew what it meant to be feared for something natural, to be misunderstood to such a level that it became dangerous, not because he was dangerous, but because no one ever explained the truth. Behind them, the Kralin officers resumed their usual patrols, but this time they looked at Leo with new eyes, no longer with suspicion, but with something closer to curiosity. A few nodded silently as he passed. Others simply observed with less tension in their faces. Rila herself stood near the security gate, her arms crossed as always, but her stance more relaxed, her eyes meeting Leo's with a steady calm that held no aggression, no judgment, only quiet acknowledgement. She stepped forward as he neared the final exit of the station, and without hesitation she reached into her armored belt and pulled out a small polished metal token, shaped like a curved flame etched with the symbol of the Kralin Guardians. She extended it toward him, and Leo took a breath, then accepted it gently, not fully understanding its meaning until Rila spoke in a voice clear and steady, telling him that the token was a symbol of recognition, something only given to those who had faced Kralin judgment with honor and truth. Leo looked down at the token, then back at her, and for a moment there was no difference between species, no wall of language, no cultural gap. Just two people who had seen each other beyond surface fears and misunderstandings. He smiled and offered a quiet thank you, one that came not from duty, but from something more real. Rila gave a small nod and said that perhaps her people had much more to learn about humans than they realized. Perhaps This moment was not just a lesson in anatomy, but a doorway to deeper connection, and Leo agreed, saying that understanding was not something you scanned or measured, but something you listened to, and shared as he stepped onto the human transport shuttle. The doors slid closed behind him, and the station began to fade from view through the clear panel. He watched the stars shift into patterns of light, the blackness of space stretching in all directions, and beside him, Mira rested in her seat, calmly reviewing her notes, already thinking of how to file the report. But Leo leaned back and allowed himself to smile again, not because the moment was funny, not because the fear was gone, but because something lasting had come from it. Back on Unity Station, the story began to spread, not in reports, not in political channels, but among the people, the staff, the traders, the guard. Stories of a young human who had been mistaken for a threat because of something natural, stories of how the Kralin almost made a grave mistake, and how a shared truth had changed everything. Soon the tale took on a humorous tone in some circles, a cautionary tale in others, and in time it became one of the station's most repeated anecdotes about how first impressions could be wrong, and how knowing someone fully often meant letting go of old ideas and opening up to the strange beauty of difference. For Leo, it was more than a story. It was a reminder that being human in a galaxy full of wonders meant carrying not just curiosity or courage, but patience, the kind of patience that could turn fear into respect and misunderstanding into peace. And though he never asked for it, he became the first human to be officially recognized by the Kralin Guardians as a figure of trust. As the stars drifted past the shuttle and the engines hummed in steady rhythm, Leo held the token in his hand, turning it slowly, feeling its cool surface, its smooth edges, and the weight it now carried, not just in metal, but in meaning. And in that quiet moment, he knew that something had changed forever, not just for him, but maybe for all of humanity. The end.